What up, though? Propaganda by Edward L. Bernays, 1928. The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. This is a logical result of the way in which our democratic society is organized. Vast numbers of human beings must cooperate in this manner if they are to live together as a smoothly functioning society. Our invisible governors are, in many cases, unaware of the identity of their fellow members in the inner cabinet. Whatever attitude one chooses to take toward this condition, it remains a fact that in almost every act of our daily lives, whether in the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or our ethical thinking, we are dominated by the relatively small number of persons, a trifling fraction of our 120 million, who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. It is not usually realized how necessary these invisible governors are to the orderly functioning of our group life. Our Constitution does not envisage political parties as part of the mechanism of government, and its framers seem not to have pictured to themselves the existence in our national politics of anything like the modern political machine. Rudimentary political parties arose almost overnight. Ever since then, we have agreed, for the sake of simplicity and practicality, that party machines should narrow down the field of choice to two candidates, or at most three or four. In theory, every citizen makes up his mind on public questions and matters of private conduct. In practice, if all men had to study for themselves the abstruse economic, political, and ethical data involved in every question, they would find it impossible to come to a conclusion about anything. Everybody buys the best and cheapest commodities offered to him on the market. In practice, if everyone went around pricing and chemically testing before purchasing the dozens of soaps or fabrics or brands of bread which are for sale, economic life would become hopelessly jammed. To avoid such confusion, society consents to have its choice narrowed to ideas and objects brought to its attention through propaganda of all kinds. There is consequently a vast and continuous effort going on to capture our minds in the interest of some policy or commodity or idea. We have chosen open competition. To achieve this, society has consented to permit free competition to be organized by leadership and propaganda. As civilization has become more complex, and as the need for invisible government has been increasingly demonstrated, the technical means have been invented and developed by which opinion may be regimented. With the printing press and the newspaper, the railroad, the telephone, telegraph, radio, and airplanes, ideas can be spread rapidly and even instantaneously over the whole of America. H.G. Wells senses the vast potentialities of these inventions when he writes in the New York Times. Modern means of communication, the power afforded by print, telephone, wireless, and so forth, of rapidly putting through directive, strategic, or technical conceptions to a great number of cooperating sinners, of getting quick replies and effective discussion, have opened up a new world of political processes. H.G. Wells continues, ideas and phrases can now be given an effectiveness greater than the effectiveness of any personality and stronger than any sectional interest. When the Constitution was adopted, the unit of organization was the village community, which produced the greater part of its own necessary commodities and generated its group ideas and opinions by personal contact and discussion directly among its citizens. But today, because ideas can be instantaneously transmitted to any distance and to any number of people, this geographical integration has been supplemented by many other kinds of grouping, so that persons having the same ideas and interests may be associated and regimented for common action, even though they live thousands of miles apart. It is extremely difficult to realize how many and diverse are these cleavages in our society. They may be social, political, economic, racial, religious, or ethical, with hundreds of subdivisions of each. In the World Almanac, for example, the following groups are listed under the A's. Look. The N's published in Chicago. They are Look. Here are the conventions scheduled for Cleveland, Ohio, recorded in a single recent issue of World Convention dates, a fraction of the 5,500 conventions and rallies scheduled. Look. Other conventions to be held in 1928 were those of Life satirically expresses this idea in the reply, which it represents an American as giving to the Britisher who praises this country for having no upper and lower classes or caste. Yeah, all we have is the 400, the white collar men, bootleggers, Wall Street barons, criminals, the DAR, the KKK, the colonial dames, the Masons, Kiwanis, and Rotarians, the K of C, the Elks, the censors, the cognoscenti, the morons, heroes like Lindy, the WCTU, politicians, Menschkanites, the bourgeoisie, immigrants, broadcasters, and the rich and poor. This invisible intertwining structure of groupings and association is the mechanism by which democracy has organized its group mind and simplified its mass thinking. To deplore the existence of such a mechanism is to ask for a society such as never was and never will be. To admit that it easts, but expect that it shall not be used, is unreasonable. Emil Ludwig represents Napoleon as ever on the watch for indications of public opinion, always listening to the voice of the people, a voice which defies calculation. Do you know, he said in those days, what amazes me more than all else, or what amazes me more than all else? The impotence of force to organize anything. Explain the structure of the mechanism which controls the public mind, and to tell how it is manipulated by the special pleader who seeks to create public acceptance for a particular idea or commodity. Louis XIV made his modest remark, "L'état, si est moi." Propaganda is the executive arm of the invisible government. Universal literacy was supposed to educate the common man to control his environment. Once he could read and write, he would have a mind fit to rule. So ran the democratic doctrine, but instead of a mind, universal literacy has given him rubber stamps linked with advertising slogans, with editorials with published scientific data, which the trivialities of the tabloids and the platitudes of history, but quite innocent of original thought. Each man's rubber stamps are the duplicates of millions of others, so that when those millions are exposed to the same stimuli, all receive identical imprints. The mechanism by which ideas are disseminated on a large scale is propaganda. I am aware that the word propaganda carries to many minds an unpleasant connotation, yet whether in any instance propaganda is a good or bad depends upon the merit of the cause urged and the correctness of the information published. In itself, the word propaganda has certain technical meanings which, like most things in this world, are neither good nor bad, but custom makes them so. I find the word defined in Funk and Wagnall's dictionary in 4 ways. A society of cardinals, the overseers of foreign missions, also the College of Propaganda at Rome, founded by Pope Urban VIII in 1627 for the education of missionary priests, Sacred College de Propaganda Fide. Hence, any institution or scheme for propagating a doctrine or system. Effort directly systematically toward the gaining of public support for an opinion or course of action. If you turn to the Standard Dictionary, you will find that the word was applied to a congregation or society of cardinals for the care and oversight of the foreign missions, which was instituted at Rome in the year 1627. It was applied also to the College of the Propaganda at Rome that was founded by Pope Urban VIII for the education of the missionary priest. In later years, the word came to be applied to any institution or scheme for propagating a doctrine or system, any society, whether it be social, religious, or political, which is possessed of certain beliefs and sets out to make them known either by the spoken or written words, is practicing propaganda. Truth is mighty and must prevail. And if any body of men believe that they have discovered a valuable truth, it is not merely their privilege, but their duty to disseminate that truth. If they realize, as they quickly must, that this spreading of the truth can be done upon a large scale and effectively only by organized effort, they will make use of the press and the platform as the best means to give it wide circulation. It is only necessary to look under the surface of the newspaper for a hint as to the propaganda's authority over public opinion. Page 1 of the New York Times on the day these paragraphs are written contains 8 important news stories. 4 of them, or 1/2, are propaganda. The casual reader accepts them as accounts of spontaneous happenings. But are they? Modern propaganda is a consistent, enduring effort to create or shape events to influence the relations of the public to an enterprise, idea, or group. This practice of creating circumstances and of creating pictures in the minds of millions of persons is very common. Virtually no important undertaking is now carried on without it. whether that enterprise be building a cathedral, endowing a university, marketing a moving picture, floating a large bond issue, or electing a president. Sometimes the effect of the public is created by a professional propagandist, sometimes by an amateur deputed for the job. So vast are the numbers of minds which can be regimented, and so tenacious are they when regimented, that a group at times offers an irresistible pressure before which legislators, editors, and teachers are helpless. The group will cling to its stereotype, as Walter Lippmann calls it, making of those supposedly powerful beings, the leaders of public opinion, mere bits of driftwood in the surf. When an imperial wizard, sensing what is perhaps hunger for an ideal, offers a picture of a nation all Nordic and nationalistic, the common man of the older American stock feel himself elbowed out of his rightful position in prosperity by the newer immigrant stocks, grasp the picture which fits in so neatly with his prejudices and makes it his own. In our present social organization, approval of the public is essential to any large undertaking. A laudable movement may be lost unless it impresses itself on the public mind. Charity, as well as business and politics and literature for that matter, have to adopt propaganda, for the public must be regimented into giving money, just as it must be regimented into tuberculosis prophylaxis. Propaganda does exist on all sides of us, and it does change our mental picture of the world. Anyone with sufficient influence can lead sections of the public, at least for a time and for a given purpose. Those whose position or ability gives them power can no longer do what they want without the approval of the masses. They find in propaganda a tool which is increasingly powerful in gaining that approval. It was the astounding success of propaganda during the war that opened the eyes of the intelligent few in all departments of life to the possibilities of regimenting the public mind. The manipulators of patriotic opinion made use of the mental cliches and the emotional habits of the public to produce mass reactions against the alleged atrocities, the terror, and the tyranny of the enemy. Millions of housewives may feel that manufactured foods deleterious to health should be prohibited, but there is little chance that their individual desires will be translated into effective legal form unless their half-expressed demand can be organized, made vocal, and concentrated upon the state legislature or upon the federal Congress in some mode. Millions of housewives may feel that manufactured foods deleterious to health should be prohibited, but there is little chance that their individual desires will be translated into effective legal form unless their half-expressed demand can be organized, made vocal, and concentrated upon the state legislature or upon the federal Congress in some mode which will produce the results they desire. Whether they realize it or not, they call upon propaganda to organize and effectuate their demand. Clearly, it is the intelligent minorities which need to make use of propaganda continuously and systematically. Small groups of persons can and do make the rest of us think that they please about a given subject, think what they please about a given subject. But there are usually proponents and opponents of every propaganda, both of whom are equally eager to convince the majority. Who are the men who, without our realizing it, give us our ideas, tell us whom to admire and whom to despise, what to believe about the ownership of public utilities, about the tariff, about the price of rubber, about the Dawes Plan, about immigration, who tell us how our houses should be designed, what furniture we should put in them, what menus we should serve on our table, what kind of shirts we must wear, what sports we should indulge in, what plays we should see, what charities we should support, what pictures we should admire, what slang we should affect, what jokes we should laugh at. If we set out to make a list of the men and women who, because of their position in public life, might fairly be called the molders of public opinion, we could quickly arrive at an extended list of persons mentioned in Who's Who. It would obviously include the President of the United States and the members of his cabinet, the senators and representatives in Congress, the governors of our 48 states, the presidents of the chambers of commerce in our 100 largest cities, the chairman of the boards of directors of our 100 or more largest industrial corporations, the president of many of the labor unions affiliated in the American Federation of Labor, the national president of each of the national professional and fraternal organizations, the president of each of the racial or language societies in the country, the 100 leading newspaper and magazine editors, the 50 most popular authors, the presidents of the 50 leading charitable organizations, the 20 leading theatrical or cinema producers, the 100 recognized leaders of fashion, the most popular and influential clergymen in the 100 leading cities, the presidents of our colleges and universities, and the foremost members of their faculties, the most powerful financiers in Wall Street, the most noted amateurs of sports, and so on. Such a list would comprise several thousand persons, but it is well known that many of these leaders are themselves led, sometimes by persons whose names are known to few. A presidential candidate may be drafted in response to overwhelming popular demand, but it is well known that his name may be decided upon by half a dozen men sitting around a table in a hotel room. There are invisible rulers who control the destinies of millions. It is not generally realized to what extent the words and actions of our most influential public men are dictated by shrewd persons operating behind the scenes. In some departments of our daily life, in which we imagine ourselves free agents, we are ruled by dictators exercising great power. A man buying a suit of clothes imagines that he is choosing, according to his taste and his personality, the kind of garment which he prefers. In reality, he may be obeying the orders of an anonymous gentleman tailor in London. This personage is the silent partner in a modest tailoring establishment which is patronized by gentlemen of fashion and princes of the blood. He suggests to British noblemen and others a blue cloth instead of gray, 2 buttons instead of 3, or sleeves a quarter of an inch narrower than last season. The distinguished customer approves of the idea. Women are just as subject to the commands of invisible government as are men. A silk manufacturer seeking a new market for its product suggested to a large manufacturer of shoes that women's shoes should be covered with silk to match their dresses. The idea was adopted and systematically propagandized. A popular actress was persuaded to wear the shoes. The fashion spread. The shoe firm was ready with the supply to meet the created demand, and the silk company was ready with the silk for more shoes. The man who injected this idea into the shoe industry was ruling women in one department of their social lives. Different men rule us in the various departments of our lives. There may be a handful of men who control the educational methods of the great majority of our schools, yet from another standpoint, Every parent is a group leader with authority over his or her children. Governments, whether they are monarchical, constitutional, democratic, or communist, depended upon acquiescent public opinion for the success of their efforts, and, in fact, government is only government by virtue of the public government is only government by virtue of public acquiescence. Industries, public utilities, educational movements, indeed, all groups representing any concept or product, whether they are majority or minority ideas, succeed only because of approving public opinion. Public opinion is the unacknowledged partner in all broad efforts. Public relations concentrates on the public contacts of his client's business, every phase of his client's ideas, products, or activities which may affect the public or in which the public may have an interest in part of his function. The Council on Public Relations is not an advertising man, but he advocates advertising where that is indicated. Very often, he is called in by an advertising agency to supply its work on behalf of a client. His work and that of the advertising agency do not conflict with or duplicate each other. If the corset makers, for instance, wish to bring their product into fashion again, he would unquestionably advised that the plan was impossible, since women have definitely emancipated themselves from the old style corset. Yet his fashion advisors might report that women might be persuaded to adopt a certain type of girdle, which eliminated the unhealthful features of the corset. His next effort is to analyze his public. He studies the group which must be reached and the leaders through whom he may approach these groups. Social groups, economic groups, geographical groups, age groups, doctrinal groups, language groups, cultural groups. All these represent the divisions through which, on behalf of his client, he may talk to the public. The Metropolitan Life Insurance Company, prompted by the most fundamental self-interest, initiated a conscious, directed effort to change the attitude of the public toward insurance companies in general, and toward itself in particular, to its profit and public's benefit. It tried to make a majority movement of itself by getting the public to buy its policies. It reached the public at every point of its corporate and separate existences. The communities it gave health surveys and expert counsel. To individual it gave health creeds and advice. Even the building in which the corporation was located was made a picturesque landmark to see and remember. In other words, to carry on the associative process. And so this company came to have a broad general acceptance. The number and amount of its policies grew consistently, and its broad contacts with society increased. Within a decade, many large corporations were employing public relations counsel under one title or another, for they had come to recognize that they depended upon public goodwill for their continued prosperity. They were obliged to convince the public that they were conforming to its demands as to honesty and fairness. The systematic study of mass psychology revealed to students the potentialities of invisible government of society by manipulation of the motives which actuate men in the group. Trotter and Lebon, who approached the subject in a scientific manner, and Graham Wallas, Walter Lippmann, and others who continued with searching studies of the group mind, established that the group had mental characteristics distinct from those of the individual, and is motivated by impulses and emotions which cannot be explained on the basis of what we know of individual psychology. So the question naturally arose: if we understand the mechanism of motives of the group mind, is it not possible to control and regiment the masses according to our will without their knowing it? The recent practice of propaganda has proved that it is possible, at least up to a certain point and within certain limits. Propaganda is not a science in the laboratory sense, but it is no longer entirely the empirical affair that it was before the advent of the study of mass psychology. It is now scientific in the sense that it seeks to base its operations upon definite knowledge drawn from direct observation of the group mind. Propaganda, like economics and sociology, can never be an exact science for the reason that its subject matter, like theirs, deals with human beings. If you can influence the leaders either with or without their conscious cooperation, you automatically influence the group which they sway. Men do not need to be actually gathered together in a public meeting or in a street riot to be subject to the influences of mass psychology. Man is by nature gregarious. He feels himself to be a member of a herd, even when he is alone in his room with the curtains drawn. His mind retains the patterns which have been stamped on it by the group influences. A man sits in his office deciding what stocks to buy. He imagines, no doubt, that he is planning his purchases according to his own judgment. In actual fact, his judgment is a melange of expressions stamped on his mind by outside influences, which unconsciously control his thought. Trotter and Laban concluded that the group mind does not think in the strict sense of the word. In place of thought, it has impulses, habits, and emotions. In making up its mind, its first impulse is usually to follow the example of a trusted leader. This is one of the most firmly established principles of mass psychology. When the examples of the leader is not at hand and the herd must think for itself, it does so by means of cliches, pat words, or images which stand for a whole group of ideas or experiences. By playing upon an old cliche or manipulating a new one, the propagandist can sometimes swing a whole mass of group emotions. It is chiefly the psychologists of the schools of Freud who have pointed out that many of man's thoughts and actions are compensatory substitutes for desires which he has been obliged to suppress. A thing may be desired for its intrinsic worth or usefulness, but because he has unconsciously come to see it a symbol of something else, the desire for which he is ashamed to admit to himself. Suppose the old type of salesmanship acting for a meat packer was seeking to increase the sale of bacon. It would reiterate innumerable times in full-page advertisements, eat more bacon. Eat bacon because it is cheap, because it is good, because it gives you reserve energy. The newer salesmanship, understanding the group structure of society and the principles of mass psychology, would first ask, who is it that influenced the eating habits of the public? The answer, obviously, is the physicians. The new salesman will then suggest to physicians to say publicly that it is wholesome to eat bacon. He knows as a mathematical certainty that large numbers of persons will follow the advice of their doctors because he understands the psychological relation of dependence of men upon their physicians. Under the old salesmanship, the manufacturer said to the prospective purchaser, please buy a piano. The new salesmanship has reversed the process and caused the prospective purchaser to say to the manufacturer, please sell me a piano. One of the most effective methods is the utilization of the group formation of modern society in order to spread ideas. Business today is taking the public into partnership. Business realizes that its relationship to the public is not confined to the manufacturer and sales of a given product, but includes at the same time the selling of itself and of all those things for which it stands in the public mind. Business is conscious of the public's conscience. This consciousness has led to a healthy cooperation. Mass production is only profitable if its rhythm can be maintained. That is, if it can continue to sell its product in steady or increasing quantity. The growth of newspapers and magazines have a circulation of millions of copies, and the art of the modern advertising expert in making the printed message attractive and persuasive have placed the businessman in a personal relation with a vast and diversified public. Business is becoming dependent on public opinion. It matters not how much capital you may have, how far the rates may be, how favorable the conditions of service. If you haven't behind you a sympathetic public opinion, you are bound to fail. This is the opinion of Samuel Insull, one of the foremost traction magnates of the country, and the late Judge Gary of the United States Steel Corporation expressed the same idea when he said, "Once you have the goodwill of the general public, you can go ahead in the work of constructive expansion. Too often, many try to discount this vague and intangible element. That way lies destruction. Public opinion is no longer inclined to be unfavorable to the large business merger. It has broken down the antitrust laws where it thinks they hinder economic development. Public opinion itself fosters the growth of mammoth industrial enterprises." Take the case of toothpaste. Here is a highly competitive field in which the preponderance of public acceptance of one product over another can very legitimately rest in inherent values. However, what has happened in this field? One or two of the larger manufacturers have asserted advantages for their toothpaste, which no single toothpaste discovered up to present time can possibly have. The competing manufacturer is put in the position either of overemphasizing an already exaggerated emphasis or of letting the overemphasis of his competitor take away his markets. He turns to the weapon of propaganda, which can effectively, through various channels of approach to the public, the dental clinics, the schools, the women's clubs, the medical colleges, the dental press, and even the daily press, bring to the public the truth of what a toothpaste can do. This will, of course, have its effects in making the honestly advertised toothpaste get to its real public. Mass advertising has produced new kinds of competition. Competition between rival products in the same line is, of course, as old as economic life itself. In recent years, much has been said of the new competition. We have discussed it in a previous chapter between the group of products and another. Between one group of products and another. Stone competes against wood for building, linoleum against carpets, oranges against apples, tin against asbestos for roofing. This type of competition has been humorously illustrated by Mr. O.H. Cheney, Vice President of the American Exchange and Irving Trust Company of New York, in a speech before the Chicago Business Secretaries Forum. "Do you represent the millinery trades?" said Mr. Cheney. "The man at your side may serve the fur industry, and by promoting the style of big fur collars on women's coats, he is ruining the hat business by forcing women to wear small and inexpensive hats." If you represent the plumbing and heating business, you are the mortal enemy of the textile industry because warmer homes mean lighter clothes. If you represent the printers, how can you shake hands with the radio equipment man? No serious sociologist any longer believes that the voice of the people expresses any divine or specially wise and lofty idea. The voice of the people expresses the mind of the people, and that mind is made up for it by the group leaders in whom it believes and by those persons who understand the manipulation of public opinion. It is composed of inherited prejudices and symbols and cliches and verbal formulas supplied to them by the leaders. The sincere and gifted politician is able, by the instrument of propaganda, to mold and form the will of the people. The methods of our contemporary politicians in dealing with the public are as archaic and ineffective as the advertising methods of business in 1900 would be today. Politics was the first important department of American life to use propaganda on a large scale. American business first learned from politics the methods of appealing to the broad public. Given our present political conditions under which every office seeker must cater to the vote of the masses, the only means by which the born leader can lead is the expert use of propaganda. Political campaigns today are all sideshows, all honors, all bombast, glitter, and speeches. These are for the most part unrelated to the main business of studying the public scientifically, of supplying the public with party, candidate, platform, and performance, and selling the public these ideas and products. Politics was the first big business in America. Therefore, there is a good deal of irony in the fact that business has learned everything that politics has had to teach, but that politics has failed to learn very much from business methods of mass distribution of ideas and products. Emily Newell Blair has recounted in The Independent a typical instance of the waste of effort and money in a political campaign, a week's speaking tour in which she herself took part. This, she says, was a drive for votes, just as an Ivory Soap advertising campaign is a drive for sales. It is incomprehensible that politicians do not make use of the elaborate business methods that industry has built up. The politician understands the public. He knows what the public wants and what the public will accept. But the politician is not necessarily a general sales manager, a public relations counsel, or a man who knows how to secure mass distribution of ideas. Big business has realized that it must use as many of the basic emotions as possible. The politician, however, has used the emotions aroused by words almost exclusively. Even Henry Ford, the most picturesque personality in business in America today, has become known through his product and not his product through him. President Coolidge invited actors for breakfast. He did so because he realized not only that actors were a group, but that audiences, the large group of people who like amusements, who like people who amuse them, and who like people who can be amused, ought to be aligned with him. At present, the political campaigner uses for the greatest part the radio, the press, the banquet hall, the mass meeting, the lecture platform, and the stump generally as a means for furthering his ideas. But this is only a small part of what may be done. Actually, there are infinitely more varied events that can be created to dramatize the campaign and to make people talk of it. exhibitions, contests, institutes of politics, the cooperation of educational institutions, the dramatic cooperation of groups which hitherto have not been drawn into active politics, and many others may be made the vehicle for presentation of ideas to the public. But whatever is done must be synchronized accurately with all other forms of appeal to the public. News reaches the public through the printed word, books, magazines, letters, posters, circulars, and banners, newspapers, through pictures, photographs, and motion pictures, through the ear, lectures, speeches, band music, radio, campaign songs. All these must be employed by the political party if it is to succeed. It is understood that the methods of propaganda can be effective only with the voter who makes up his own mind on the basis of his group prejudices and desires. Good government can be sold to a community just as any other commodity can be sold. I talked recently with George Olvani. He said that a certain number of Princeton men were joining Tammany Hall. If I were in his place, I should have taken some of my brightest young men and set them to work for Broadway theatrical productions, or apprenticed them as assistants to professional propagandists before recruiting them to the service of the party. Newspaper reporters are obliged to work in harmony with their news sources. The political leader must be a creator of circumstances, not only a creature of mechanical processes of stereotyping and rubber stamping. He may use the modern mechanism of the radio to spread his views, but he will almost certainly use the psychological method of approach, which was old in Andrew Jackson's day, and which business has largely discarded. He will say over the radio, "Vote for me and low tariff, because the high tariff increases the cost of things you buy." He may, it is true, have the great advantage of being able to speak by radio directly to 50 million listeners, but he is making an old-fashioned approach. He is arguing with them. He is assaulting single-handed the resistance of inertia. If he were a propagandist, on the other hand, although he would still use the radio, he would use it as one instrument of a well-planned strategy. Women in contemporary America have achieved a legal equality with men. This does not mean that their activities are identical with those of men. Women in the mass still have special interests and activities in addition to their economic pursuits and vocational interest. Women's most obvious influence is exerted when they are organized and armed with the weapon of propaganda. So organized and armed, they have made their influence felt on city councils, state legislatures, and national congresses, upon executives, upon political campaigns, and upon public opinion generally, but both local and national. In politics, the American women today occupy a much more important position from the standpoint of their influence in their organized groups than from the standpoint of the leadership they have acquired in actual political positions or in actual office holding. The professional woman politician has had, up to the present, not much influence, nor do women generally regard her as being the most important element in question. If the suffrage campaign did nothing more, it showed the possibilities of propaganda to achieve certain ends. This propaganda today is being utilized by women to achieve their programs in Washington and its states, and in the states. The 8-hour day for women is theirs. The routing over into peacetime activities of the many prominent women who were in the suffrage campaigns and who also devoted themselves to the important drives and mass influence movements during the war, such women as Miss Frank Vanderlip, Alice Ames Winter, Miss Henry Moskowitz, Mrs. Florence Kelly, Mrs. John Blair, Mrs. O.H.P. Belmont, Doris Stevens, Alice Paul come to mind. An example of the keen interest of women in this field of education is the cooking school recently conducted by the New York Herald Tribune, which held its classes in Carnegie Hall, seating almost 3,000 persons. For the several days of the cooking school, the hall was filled to capacity, rivaling the drawing power of a McCormick or a Paderewski, and refuting most dramatically the idea that women in large cities are not interested in housewifery. A movement for the serving of milk in public schools or the establishment of a baby health station at the Department of Health will be an effort close to the heart of a club devoted to the interest of mothers and child welfare. A music club can broaden its sphere and be of service to the community by cooperating with the local radio station in arranging better musical programs. Fighting bad music can be as militant as a campaign and marshal as varied resources as any political battle. The public school system, materially and financially, is being adequately supported. There is marked eagerness for a college education and a vague aspiration for culture expressed in innumerable courses and lectures. The public is not cognizant of the real value of education and does not realize that education as a social force is not receiving the kind of attention it has the right to expect in a democracy. There is the fact that the educator has been trained to stimulate the thought. There is the fact that the educator has been trained to stimulate to thought the individual students in his classroom, but has not been trained as an educator at large of the public. The training of the educators in this respect should begin in the normal schools, with the addition to their curricula of whatever is necessary to broaden their viewpoint. The public cannot understand unless the teacher understands the relationship between the general public and the academic idea. The normal school should provide for the training of the educator to make him realize that his is a twofold job: education as a teacher and education as a propagandist. The endowed college is dependent upon the support, usually, of key men in industry whose social and economic objectives are concrete and limited, and therefore often at variance with the pursuit of abstract knowledge. The successful businessman criticizes the great universities for being too academic, but seldom for being too practical. Many colleges have already developed intelligent propaganda in order to bring them into active and continuous relation with the general public. The National Education Association and other societies are carrying on a definite propaganda to promote the larger purposes of educational endeavor. One of the aims of such propaganda is, of course, improvement in the prestige and material position of the teachers themselves. An occasional McAndrew case calls the attention of the public to the fact that in some schools, the teacher is far from enjoying full academic freedom, while in certain communities, the choice of teachers is based upon political or sectarian considerations rather than upon real ability. The concrete problems of colleges are more varied and puzzling than one might suppose. The pharmaceutical college of a university is concerned because the drugstore is no longer merely a drugstore, but primarily a soda fountain, a lunch counter, a bookshop, a retailer of all sorts of general merchandise, from society stationery to spare radio parts. The professor, who was back from a trip to Yucatan, in the interest of science, had solved the mystery of the Venus calendar of the ancient Mayas. He had discovered the key to the puzzle of how the Mayas kept tab on the flight of time, checking the Mayan record of celestial events against the known astronomical facts. He had found a perfect correlation between the time count of these Central American Indians and the true positions of the planet Venus in the 6th century BC, a civilization which flourished in the Western Hemisphere 25 centuries ago was demonstrated to have attained heights hitherto unappreciated by the modern world. It may surprise and shock some people, Mr. Merrill adds, to be told that the oldest and most dignified seats of learning in America now hire press agents, just as railroad companies, fraternal organizations, moving picture producers, and political parties retain them. It is nevertheless the fact. There is hardly a college or university in the country which does not, with the approval of the governing body and the faculty, maintain a publicity office with a director and a staff of assistants for the purpose of establishing friendly relations with the newspapers and through the newspapers with the public. Many universities now gladly lend members of their faculties to assist in investigations of public interest. Thus, Cornell lent Professor Wilcox to aid the government in the preparation of the national census. Professor Irving Fisher of Yale has been called in to advise on currency matters. In the ethical sense, propaganda bears the same relation to education as to business or politics. Public opinion was made or changed formally by tribal chiefs, by kings, by religious leaders. A social service organization undertook to fight lynching, Jim Crowism, and the civil discriminations against the Negro below the Mason-Dixon line. The National Association for the Advancement of the Colored People had the fight in hand. As a matter of technique, they decided to dramatize the year's campaign in an annual convention which would concentrate attention on the problem. The propagandist, a point of view on a Southern question emanating from a Southern center, would have greater authority than the same point of view issuing from any other locality, particularly when that point of view was at odds with the traditional Southern point of view. Atlanta was chosen. Surround the conference with people who were stereotypes for ideas that carried weight all over the country. The support of leaders of diversified groups was sought. Telegrams and letters were dispatched to leaders of religious, political, social, and educational groups asking for their point of view on the purpose of the conference. But in addition to these group leaders of national standing, it was particularly important from the technical standpoint to secure the opinions of group leaders of the South, even from Atlanta itself, to emphasize the purposes of the conference to the entire public. There was one group in Atlanta which could be approached. A group of ministers had been bold enough to come out for a greater interracial amity. This group was approached and agreed to cooperate in the conference. The program itself followed the general scheme: Negroes and white men from the South on the same platform expressed the same point of view. A campaign to lower the infant mortality rate is an effort to alter the habits of mothers in regard to feeding, bathing, and caring for their babies. Social service, in fact, is identical with propaganda in many cases. In the education of the American public toward greater art appreciation, propaganda plays an important part. When art galleries seek to launch the canvases of an artist, they should create public acceptance for his works. To increase public appreciation, a deliberate propagandizing effort must be made. There is no means of human communication which may not also be a means of deliberate propaganda, because propaganda is simply the establishing of reciprocal understanding between an individual and a group. The radio is at present one of the most important tools of the propagandist. Its future development is uncertain. It may compete with the newspaper as an advertising medium. Its ability to reach millions of persons simultaneously naturally appeals to the advertiser. It is possible that newspaper chains will sell schedules of advertising space on the air and on paper. Newspaper chains will possibly contract with advertisers for circulation on paper and over the air. There are at present publishers who sell space in the air and in their columns, but they regard the two as separate ventures. Large groups, political, racial, sectarian, economic, or professional, are tending to control stations to propagandize their points of view. Or is it conceivable that America may adopt the English licensing system under which the listener instead of the advertiser pays? The American motion picture is the greatest unconscious carrier of propaganda in the world today. It is a great distributor for ideas and opinions. Another instrument of propaganda is the personality. Has the device of the exploited personality been pushed too far? President Coolidge, photographed on his vacation in full Indian regalia in company with full-blooded chiefs, was the climax of a greatly over-reported vacation. Propaganda will never die out. Dignity of earth and sky. Standing at a crossroads, dignity echoes the interaction of earth, sky, and people. She brings to light the beauty and promise of the indigenous peoples and cultures that still thrive on this land. My intent is to have the sculpture stand as an enduring symbol of our shared belief that all here are sacred and in a sacred place. This place that we speak of is America, not to be confused with the United States. Dedicated September 17th, 2016. A gift to the people of South Dakota, do the right thing.